Okay, and can you all see the PowerPoint? Good. All right, I think we're all pretty comfortable with the network norms. We've all shown up and we've been present, but please know a lot of the things that we're going to talk about are going to require some deep thinking and knowing that this is bigger than us. A lot of the things with the dyslexia legislation are going to require a lot of teamwork and a lot of considerations. So while some of the things that we talk about might not be in your sphere of influence, please know that if you need to take this back to anybody, you know, we're happy to meet with anyone and support any of your efforts within the control that you do have. And we thank you all for just being right on time today. What we're going to talk about today is some of the updates, as we know, relate to the dyslexia legislation specific to the new handbook. We're going to use the handbook to guide a lot of our discussion today so that we can kind of, you know, I don't want to say birds, but two birds, one stone, and look at that handbook alongside some of the discussions that we're having. We want to give you an update as it relates to the assessment decision-making process. And then we have a special guest with us today, Nicole Herbert. She is with the state support team here in Region 1. A lot of you know her. She recently attended a professional development session, and she was sharing out with Debbie and I, and we're like, we would love if you could just hop on and spend 5 minutes kind of sharing what you learned from that session. We know a lot of you are talking professional development and making plans for next year. So we just wanted to give you another thought to consider. And then based off majority vote, we're going to spend some of our time today looking at and discussing some considerations for that certification process. You should know us by now that we never always go straight to what we say we're going to talk about. We're going to backpedal a bit and look at some things as it relates to context, some current practices and past practices to help maybe mold some considerations for you as you start to determine what that certification process looks like, but then also what that role will be in your school improvement efforts. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Nicole to share, and then we'll open up for any like burning questions or anything for her or anything else that you might have on your minds before we go into the content for today. Nicole?
Thank you, Jackie. Oh, good. I'm glad you put that up there. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole Herbert. As Jackie had said, with SST1. I had the pleasure of attending a professional development in Akron 2 days ago, and the book that Jackie has up here, How Leadership Works, was the focus of the PD for the day. If any of you have had the opportunity to listen to Kathy Lassiter, she was one of the presenters, along with Doug Fisher, who also, both of them co-authored this book along with Nancy Fry and Dominique Smith. And if you've not had the opportunity to listen to Kathy or Doug, I would suggest if you get the chance to take it. I did find out this morning that this professional development will be offered again in June virtually. And Corwin's website is a place where you can go to find that registration if it's something that after what I share seems of an interest to you. We would highly recommend it. I'm also hoping that it's something that we can get in our region and get Kathy here starting in the fall and maybe do a series with this. So as you can tell, the day was really about leadership, specifically instructional leadership, excuse me, and the difference between instructional leadership and transformational leadership. And so I don't know how many of you are familiar with John Hattie and his effect sizes. But the majority of this work is definitely, thanks Jackie, definitely relies on the work of Hattie. And so instructional leadership, let me back up. So John Hattie's work is, he takes all of the research and puts them together and comes up with an effect size. And we know that anything that has an effect size of 0.4 or higher, that we will get more than a year's worth of growth from our students. And so instructional leadership is one of those things that we talked about being a main contributor to student success. And instructional leadership itself has a 0.42 effect size. And so we really broke that down throughout the day and talked about what that looks like and being clear. This particular book is new, and it's actually what they call a playbook. And so it's broken into different modules. And within the modules are different activities that leaders can do. We talked about mind frames of school leaders. We talked about making learning and leadership clear, what it's like to do observations. Are we really collecting data on teaching and learning? Are we providing meaningful feedback to teachers to improve instruction? And then one of the most highest effect sizes that principals can do is leading, organizing, and participating in professional learning for the staff. So if we have leaders who are sitting in and organizing and even leading that work, we're going to see even more growth. I also thought that it was interesting that the comment was made by Doug Fisher based on research. He said, if we replaced the bottom 25% of leaders with the top 25% of leaders, we would see student growth increase by 3 months. And I thought that was pretty telling about the impact that leaders have on students. And so I also want to make sure that I clarify that that doesn't mean get rid of the bottom 25. That means just grow your bottom 25 into the top 25%. So what can we do to help our leaders grow into being instructional leaders? Because a lot of the time, especially with the way the world was this year, we're not able to spend as much time on instruction as we would like. So Doug Fisher, if you want to look him up, he's also, not only does he do speaking and authors several books, but he is also in a school building out of San Diego. He was a principal for a while. He's left that position and taken an instructional coach position so that he can still do these other things in his life and speak. But another piece that I found very interesting is the school building in which he is. It's a 912 high school, and they've used the same instructional model since 1999. And so there's something to be said about the consistency in which they deliver their instruction. I just found that really interesting. And so that really led me to start thinking about what instructional frameworks are we using here in Ohio, in our region? Are we aware of what those instructional frameworks are? How do they align with the work that you all are about to embark on with your literacy work? And it's his staff is also responsible for having 50% of the time spent, instructional time spent each week on student to student collaboration and interaction. And with that, they observe it. They look for it in classrooms. They're held accountable to it. They're making sure that they're looking for questioning, for cueing, for probing, and not just feeding answers to students. So keeping that level of rigor and engagement pretty high. The other piece that I walked away with is something in the book as well, and it's about teaching engagement. So are we teaching our students how to be engaged and what it means to be engaged? What does it look like to be engaged or to be disengaged? And so there's a continuum from avoiding work all the way down to investing in the work that you're doing. And how do we make that clear to students? Again, let's define what it means to avoid. Let's define what it means to participate, and setting goals with students. Where are we on the continuum today? We may be, depending on context, right? It changes. Even as adult learners, it changes. And so that was another piece that I walked away with that I would like to learn a little bit more about and talk to leaders about how we could look at something like that in our buildings. And I think for us at the SST to think about what that means when we are also providing PD to our staff, and to know that it can change from time to time. And then lastly, I will say this, one of the other pieces, this is just another thing, you all may be familiar with it, but Google Studio, I don't know if anybody is familiar with Google Studio. I looked yesterday, I looked it up, and it is one of their free options, but it's a data collection. It's a way for us to use charts and graphs based on inputting data. It was shared with us by a principal who collects data during her walkthroughs, and she puts it into this Google Studio, Google Data Studio, and is able to share it with her building leadership team and her district leadership team that way too. So it was just another little nugget that I walked away with, something that I'd like to look into. So I know that's really a lot of information, really brief. I don't know if anyone has questions about whether it be the book or Kathy or Doug, but I'd be happy to answer anything that that may have stood out in that brief bit of information. I will make sure that if this is something that comes to our region, we'll make sure that we get it out sooner rather than later. So it's something that you can all look into with a better, clear description of what that would entail. But check this book out if you get an opportunity. And I do know if you sign up for the June 14th virtual PD, you get a copy of the book. It's a digital copy, I believe. But they include that in the registration. There is a fee. I will say this, if the SST brings it in, obviously, you know that the professional development that we offer, there's not a charge if it's something that you would choose to do over the summer or on your own. Corwin does have a fee for it, but that book is included during that time.
Nicole, so a lot of the people in our network are like literacy coaches and are modeling instruction or supporting like literacy frameworks for coaching. Could you share that one example that you gave to us about something that they do to kind of empower their walkthrough process with the picture thing that you told me real quick?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Yep. So two things, I guess. They're contracted that they have to have an hour and a half staff meeting a month. And I think they do it twice a month, honestly. One of those meetings, what they do is they take 10 minutes every morning. Rather than having an hour and a half after school, they do 10 minutes every day as a check-in, kind of like a morning meeting that you would do with students. They give affirmations to one another. They talk about what's happening in their building, what's happening in their room. As a part of that, they do something where somebody randomly takes a picture of something that's going on in a classroom. Typically, that does not include any people. So it would be a poster. One of the ideas that he or examples that he gave that day that had happened, he got an email of it, and it was a picture of an owl that was on someone's desk. So they take this picture, they send it out in a staff email, and you have to name it. I'm sorry, you have to claim it, you have to name it, and you have to explain it. So you have to say, yep, that's my classroom. This is what it is, and explain why or what it is that you're doing with that particular thing. And then it sparks conversation amongst staff. What does that mean? How long have you been doing this? How are students reacting? What are your outcomes? And so it's all via email. But it's really interesting because it just brings this sense of climate community. We know what's going on. You get to show off something that you're doing. You get, your peers to pick up on other things. And so I thought that was pretty cool. But I will say that the amount of time that this high school spends with building the culture within their staff and their teachers, they're very much dedicated to doing that. And so it's name it, claim it, explain it. And it's just a random picture. in the classroom.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for her? All right, well, I put the link for the material or the book and the PD in the Padlet for you. We really appreciate your time, Nicole. And you're welcome to stick with us, or we'll see you later.
Thanks, Jackie. Just can I say one more thing that I forgot to mention
course.
real quick? I know I mentioned the John Hattie work, and I'm going to stick this in the chat too for all of you who may not be familiar, or even if you are. So this is the MetaX website. It's visiblelearningmetax.com, and all of the influences that they've collected data and research around with the actual effect size can be located in this on this site. And it'll give an explanation of what the strategy or the influence is, the research that's behind it, the effect size, the number of students that the research has impacted. And it's just a really good place for any of you that are working through OIP when you get to selecting that research-based or evidence-based, instructional piece. This is a great tool to get in there and use. So if you have questions, once you get in there, you can always reach out to me individually, but I just wanted to share that resource as well. So thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so as many of you have probably already heard, that we finally have the guidebook passed through legislation. So celebration, we finally have it. So if you have the April 2022, it should say that on the bottom left corner, you have the most current guidebook with all of the changes that they made as they were coordinating efforts along with the State Board of Education. So that is the most recent, and we're pretty excited about that. Now, as far as I know, what everybody's been waiting for is this list of screeners. So I've asked Christy Schinover from Swanton to give an update as to where we're at in that process with the screeners, because she was applied to be one of the people who will vet the screeners, and she received word that she was selected to be on that committee. So I wanted her to share now kind of where we're at in this whole process of getting those screeners ready to be released to you.
Good morning. So the team is going to meet on Friday for training, and then we'll then get access to the applications and materials to review. We have a window for review and for the teams to come to a consensus about the screeners by June 3rd would be the completion date. But then if there was one that is not approved, then that applicant would have 10 days to appeal. And whoever reviewed those, whoever reviewed that particular screener would then meet again to reconsider based on the appeal. So that's where we're at so far.
Did they give you a date as to when? Was somebody asking a question? I interrupted. I'm sorry. Okay, so I was just curious, have they given a date to you, Christy, as to when they plan to release this information to districts? I can't hear her. Can the rest of you hear her?
Sorry, no, they have not given a date as to when they're actually going to release it. I'm assuming, and this is just a guess, not based in fact, but I'm assuming mid-June if they're allowing applicants who are not approved the first time around to appeal the process or appeal the original decision. So, I mean, I wouldn't think before the second week of June, but that's just a guess.
And when you say appeal, you mean the vendor would have 10 days to kind of produce a rebuttal to the reason why they weren't approved. Okay. I saw her say correct. I want to put a summary of what Christy offered us in the chat. Thank you so much, Christy. So Debbie, floor is yours.
Yeah, so kind of to back it up, so the dyslexia book, went through that whole, the guidebook went through that whole process. In the meantime, kind of running in tandem is that vendors were able to submit if they wanted to be one of the vendors listed on that list that all districts need to select from for their tier 1 screener. They could apply, make application for that. So those vendors has closed, that window is closed. The vendors have applied. And then they sent out an all call for people who wanted to be on part of this committee that's going to vet these screeners according to a very strict guidelines. So they're going to be trained on that tomorrow, and they'll be given those guidelines that they're going to follow. And then from that, they will approve or deny, I guess, any of those that don't meet the criteria set forth by the committee. So that's where we're at in that process. So hopefully mid-June, but we're finally kind of wrapping things up. Not as timely as we had hoped, but at least we can see movement. Any questions for Christy or around any of this or comments? Okay. So Jackie and I were really excited after last month's meeting with all of you, because we felt like we had finally gotten to a place where we're really beginning to network. We had great organic conversation, points of consideration were brought up and people were asking, what everybody else is doing. And that's the whole purpose of that network. So there's really a lot of power that sits in this room right now. And so we want to make sure that we're using that. For example, Christy had that unique vantage point of being selected to be on that committee. So she can then give us kind of an inside look as to what's happening with that we probably would not be privy to any other way. And so we want to use this power and to continue the good thing that was going, especially last month, where we had so much conversation, because you have such unique skill sets. That we want to make sure that we're sharing that expertise and inspiration, like where were your successes, share, like how did you make that happen? Or we're all struggling with this together, and we're going to kind of talk about today that process for creating that certification process for that person in your district or persons that we are going to be requiring certification. So how can we brainstorm together those ideas to make all of our work a little bit easier and we're more united? So we're going to really generate solutions with like-minded peers. And so that's the whole point of it. So we're really excited and hopeful that we're going to have a lot of conversation and a lot of give and take from here on forward, because that's how we're really going to move this network and to really be helpful to one another.
Any thoughts or questions before we start kind of diving into some of our activities for today? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We just want to call everyone's attention to some components of the guidebook to make sure before we leave today that we kind of all are on the same page as it relates to, okay, what do we have to do next year? If you've had a chance to kind of peruse this, not much has changed. Of course, the requirements in the law have not changed, but some of the layout considerations have. So if you flip to page 3 of the guidebook, be a breakdown of the requirements that you all have to do next year. I think, you know, we of course don't want to like focus our efforts on quote unquote compliance, but Debbie and I have been talking with you all throughout the year about utilizing these requirements into our school improvement efforts and what that will look like almost like cyclically as you start to embed these mandates into your practices. So a lot of that can feel really big and overwhelming. So we wanted to make sure that you knew kind of quote unquote the bare minimum of what needs to be done for next year, knowing that you're going to, you know, take a fine-tooth comb to a lot of your practices and make these changes more systematically over time. But like as it relates to what has to be done next year, this page, as we know, is going to offer us some insight. So our screeners for the 22-23 year have to be put in place for K through 3. We also need to administer screeners for 4 through 6 for any request. The other important thing is that can be a little confusing is that any student who transfers in needs to be given the screener. This looks a little different because then we have done with our practices like with 3rd grade reading guarantee, because we get that transfer score in, okay? That is not what happens here. If you have a dyslexia screener, even if it's the screener that you're using to meet more than one mandate, you need to provide that screener for any new transfer. On the forms, it's going to say for 1st through 6th grade, but you have to be aware of where you are in your screening process as it relates to kindergarten, right? Because you have almost like through January, right, to screen those round of kindergartners. So oftentimes transfer students, most of them, maybe your kindergartners you haven't assessed yet. But if you're doing kindergarten assessment, dyslexia screeners, you know, right alongside your other grade level screeners, then kindergarten needs to be a part of that. So if you want to kind of roll with a blanket statement that every transfer student, we screen them with the tier 1 dyslexia screener, and then knowing that we might not have done our screeners yet, especially for that kindergartner, that kindergarten grade. So we wouldn't have to like do it right then. We could wait until we're doing that screener for all of our K students. So we wanted to call specific attention to that. And we also wanted to call specific attention to the communication with parents and guardians. It's that second area down at the bottom.
Hey, Jackie, before we go on to communication, can I just interject something here?
Yep.
So most of you have screeners already in place. And since we're probably not going to know the list of screeners that's going to be released until, you know, end of June, maybe. We just want to go ahead with the screeners that we're already using. Okay, just continue using whatever screener you have. When that list is released, fortunately, there is no timeline as to when that first screener has to be done. So for example, if you're giving your screener and the list is released and the screener that you're using is not on that list, there's no reason to panic that I've got to purchase that and I've got to get everybody trained on it before the start of the school year. All right, because as long as you give it some time within that 22-23 school year, you will be fine. Okay, so that's why I'm saying whatever screener you're using now, just keep going with best practice because we know we should be screening 3 times a year. If you find out that the screener you're using is not on that list, you've got time to make that transfer. So was that clear as mud or was that helpful? Or questions around that? Okay, all right. Thanks, Jackie.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually glad that you stopped me, Debbie, because I wanted to call out some confusion when you're like unpacking this with a team. It might stir up some confusion because the communication with parents versus the requirements for that tier 2 screener and that progress monitoring component it gets the words get a little like weird and different. So if you are on this one pager, the 1, 2, 3, third box down under screening and progress monitoring, that first bullet where it says students determined to be at risk with a tier 1 dyslexia screener. You see that one? Okay. Will be progress monitored for up to 6 weeks. Students who do not demonstrate progress will be administered a tier 2 dyslexia screening measure. Then it says the district may administer a tier 2 screening measure to any student for whom the district administered a tier 1 screening measure. So that can be a little confusing. Like, okay, should I, try this progress monitoring out? But then it doesn't allude to providing any interventions. Or do I go directly to a tier 2 screener? So this is where like your lens of best practice needs to come forward, right? What are you going to implement to align to a structured literacy program for meeting the explicit and specific and diagnostic needs of each learner in your class? We know that if I administer a tier 1 and there's at-risk indicators, then I need to be more diagnostic, right? And I need to find out where that skill set or that sub-skill might be low for a specific learner. We also know that sometimes exposure alone is something that just needs to happen, right? So we might want to progress monitor, but we know that progress monitoring for the sake of progress monitoring is pointless if we're not providing explicit instruction and supports around where a child may have lower or below benchmark indicators. Okay, so you do have an option. If you want to have something in your practice where you give tier 1, and if a flag comes up and it says that they might be at risk, that you automatically provide that tier 2 screener, you can do that. If you want to do that tier 1 and have like a range where you're like, hey, we're just going to provide these, more these classroom-based interventions more and like be more explicit in some of our instructional practices because we have a wide range of learners who are scoring kind of like below markers, and then we'll progress monitor all of those kids before we provide a tier 2. You could do that too. So there's a lot of local control and options here for you based off of the needs of your learners. So while you might be showing your implementation teams all of this information, your local practices should be what's driving you to meet these specific laws. Because then when you go down further and you see the communications with parents, and it talks about that you have to tell parents that they be progress monitored for up to 6 periods and a 6-week period, and be notified of any additional assessments. That's something that's also important to make note to, because if you have to notify all the parents that you're doing tier 2, then your communication efforts at the start of the year are going to be really important. If you're putting into practice from the very beginning, hey, we're doing our tier 1 screener, and then for all of our kiddos that might have a at-risk indicator, we're going to immediately provide that diagnostic, and it's something that you're doing collectively, then that can be a part of your parent communication from the onset, right? That can be something that you have kind of just built into your system. So there is a lot of parallels between the screening decisions you make for tier 1 and tier 2 as it relates to your parent communication, right? And you want to make those decisions kind of side by side, so you have a systematic way of being able to push that out, as opposed to, okay, we do all of our screener stuff here, and then we, over here, we start to consider our parent communication component, right? So we really would suggest that you look at those and make those decisions kind of in tandem. So that, if it confuses us, it's definitely going to be a little confusing for our teachers. So if we can create our own practices and then explain those to our teachers, our support staff, and then our families, we can all kind of be on the same page. So just be aware of what you provide for your explicit explanations. Handing this guidebook to every single teacher in the building, probably not the best idea, right? There's some things can get a little hairy in here. So we wanted to call that out. Did that spark any thoughts, questions?
Personally, I love that idea, Jackie, that you brought up about like really thinking through your process now of how you're going to communicate and do business, like what it in your MTSS and your RTI process, like having kind of those almost like a decision rule, like this is what the steps we need to make sure that we're following with every single child. And the point about clarity, Brene Brown says, clarity is kind. I think that that clarity is going to be really important going forward to avoid, hopefully avoid some stresses and anxiety that is probably going to be around this at the beginning of the year, at least. Any other thoughts on this from the rest of you?
Does anybody have like a form or something that they use to document which students they're working with and which interventions? And I feel like we're very hodgepodge. This teacher uses this teacher uses this. And I wish we had a uniform way to track these students better. What's some things that you guys use?
I can share that, and I'll see if I can find this for you, Brandy, but we were on Lead for Literacy was talking about, and that's another organization, was kind of talking about this same thing. They were talking about how if we have a child, all right, so almost a sheet for a child, and this is the screener, this is where they scored, all right, so these were the areas of weakness, this was the intervention we did, how long did we do it? Then we look at the end of 6 weeks, all right, is the child getting closer to the aim line? Or are they flat or are they going down? All right, so that would determine, do we need to change the intervention? Do we need to stick with the same intervention, but maybe change our approach, make that decision, but it would track that whole child until the gap is closed. There we go.
So this research resource that I just put up, Brandy, is specific to an individual learner. And this is from that National Center for Intensive Intervention. And on there, they have an entire process for how you can monitor implementation specific to identified students. But then they also give you additional supports for creating a system, like overall collectively, like this is how our data teams make these decisions. And there's a lot of tools for that. So one of the, so this is data teaming tools specifically, but you can see here, there's a student summary form, meeting guidance for specific meetings for specific students. But what I really would like to call attention to is this area right here. There's these different online modules. So the 5 steps for DBI, that's like their process for, and the acronym is escaping me, of course, but it's their process for overall progress monitoring. And walking through those modules, I think would be very beneficial to identify what tools are going to work best for you. Because if you kind of pick and choose, some of like the vocabulary and the jargon in there won't always make sense because it's term specific to their process. Amy asked to put the link in the chat. I'd be more than happy to do that. There's also a lot of things that are specific to designing interventions and setting goals. We don't want to allude, for example, that we're setting IEP goals for all of our kids, but if we're setting specific goals, the content of this is going to also be very helpful, regardless of, you know, the intensity of support. Then there are designing, where is it? There's designing intervention in mathematics, but there's also designing intervention in reading. But there are so many things here, and we've pulled out some of these as it relates to those, you know, like changing intensity of strategies, like that dosage strength. those things that we've talked about in previous sections, but I'm telling you, there's so much in here that I would dive into it to kind of see what would be best for you. Does anybody use anything from this site that they could share on, or something else that you use to kind of track progress monitoring? Carol?
When you put those out last time, I fell in love with those, but I had created a spreadsheet for myself. I have a spreadsheet for every student, every grade level. And we use Renaissance CBMs to do our progress monitoring. So per grade level, I list what their goals should be, because they change them 3 times a year based on the benchmarking 3 times a year. And then whenever they're progress monitored, I put the score on there. So it's a 1 sheet. And we also put on there their star scores so we can see the growth. Yes, that's all available in Branch or in Renaissance. And yes, it is being put into Branching Minds, another resource. But I feel like it's a tool, it's a quick glance. I see everything at once because I've created that. I have it created for grades K through 6th. And I have starting in August all the way to May. So I do, it's a binder. I only have like 30 kids. So if you're a larger school, that might not work for you, but it's very helpful. And then I put these in the student file, their perm file. So I can look right away that they have to have, 47 letter sounds. And then I write that down. And I usually, as a quick glance, if they met the goal, I circle it so I can see they've, got 3 circles. If we want to monitor that more frequently, I can say they've met it, they've met 3. And then when we meet as a team, I can say, we've been watching them on phoneme segmentation and they haven't met their goal. So obviously the intervention that we're using here is not working. And there's place on my sheet that I can put, whatever intervention that we're doing on here. But obviously if we pick different tools, things are going to have to change. So, but that's what we're using and it's been helpful.
Thank you so much.
We kind of use like the individual student trackers, like you've shared a little bit that we created, but then we have an overall Google Doc that we list all the students and like what tier they're on, the evidence-based intervention, and then the high quality student data that we like kind of tag them at, and then what our goal is. And then it kind of goes, I don't know if I can share the link in the chat, and I've tried to delete that you guys can see. Like it should be a blank template that you can click on and see what we've created. And then we track by grade level, and then individual teachers have their own like goal sheet that they use when they actually work with the student. But yeah, that's what we kind of created. So then that's what we start at the beginning of the year with, like our star data. And then, if they're on a REMP, and then if we've deemed them that they need to be tracked, what evidence are we using to use that? And then where did we pull that from? So was it STAR? Was it our core phonics screener? And then how are we going to start at the beginning of the year with that goal? So is it going to be 3 times a week, 10 minutes? Is it going to be every day for 5 minutes? And then we kind of go then October when we meet again as our TBT, are they meeting towards that goal? If not, do we need to change the duration frequency? Do we need, and then we just keep adding kids as the school year goes.
I love this. And then is this what you use to guide discussions at TBTs?
Yeah, so then if you keep scrolling across, like every month is on there. So then kids can go off or on, we'll add them, I don't know, it's been like a 4-year in progress as we've added new columns, deleted old columns. We've now created it for like OT, speech, and PT. So a referral for students type thing.
Oh, I see that you like, so in October, you looked at some other things. So there's additional columns here. And what kind of process do you have in place, Lindsay, for like, do you have teachers fill this out beforehand? Do you come to the meeting? Do you complete it together?
So I'm the curriculum coordinator. Our building principal has like a grade level meeting every week. And we've kind of tried, the first year we like held their hand. The first 2 years we've kind of held their hand through this. This was the first year we do our data meetings the 3rd week of the month. And so the 2nd week of the month, she gives them their grade level meeting off and they're to fill this out. So that kind of time slot is they can work together, fill this out, or if individual teachers want to do on their own students, they can do that. And then the following week, we actually meet as the TBT and discuss, or, you know, if teachers are struggling with students that they're not making any progress, do we need to reevaluate? Do we need to change the duration? Do we actually need to go back? Are they missing a different skill set? And we didn't recognize that to begin with. So it just kind of depends, but the teachers are now comfortable with this enough that they fill it out on their own. And then we kind of just go through and talk through any student that's not making progress.
Wonderful. And one last final question for you, but have you seen any overall gains as it relates to student achievement? What's your takeaway as it relates to like learner impact?
I think for us, we've been able to identify students and get them the support that they need early on with the interventions to hopefully, I mean, we're not identifying students on an IEP right away, but then if we do need to, we have this data to move forward with it. If so, we didn't really have any like RTI MTSS system in place when we met. Like we've met with teachers and we had teacher meetings, but there was no universal tracking. I think teachers did it on their own. And so we kind of tried to streamline that enough. So then we, as the building principal and then the curriculum director, knew where the needs were and what, you know, because I can see like for PD, like where our kids are struggling at, you know, what do our teachers need support in then?
I love that. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Any questions for Lindsay or any other share outs?
Randy, is that what you were looking for? Something like, okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I can share mine. I'll share them to Jackie and then you can use them. I did add the 5 components that we're supposed to be tracking. I put that as like our focus so that we can identify which person, what focus we're trying to focus on. And I did for the 3rd graders, I added something if they're passing or did not pass their fall test or spring test, a place to put their score. I do have on there what tier they're in. I do have on there how many days a week we meet. That I pull them, and then I can keep their attendance on there as well. I always make note of, you know, if we move them to a different tier, the date and time on there, and we reference it a lot in all of our meetings. It's very helpful. So I'll be happy to share that.
Thank you so much. All right, so I know that we're gonna kind of pull back to go forward. But, you know, as Debbie and I were kind of talking about what we should focus our attention on and getting your all's feedback, you know, a lot of emphasis was placed on that certification process. And it's kind of, to use Debbie's words, clear as mud on what we need to do as it relates to that requirement. So we were thinking like, the more and more we were looking at all these requirements, we're like, you know, this isn't really that different than some of the 3rd grade reading guarantee requirements, but we have this added component. So, you know, the emphasis now and the anxiety maybe is kind of on this multi-tier certification process and the professional development component. But, you know, as leaders and as, you know, some of the ones that are advocating and have the voice to promote a lot of the things that we're trying to do, we challenge you to think about what changes and adjustments did you make at the 3rd grade reading guarantee onset? What changes occurred in your systems? What did that look like? How did it roll out? And then based off of that, what was the impact on your learners? And what was the impact on your teachers' capacity to better instruct all of their students? So thinking back to when 3rd grade reading guarantee first started and thinking where you are now as a district, if you were to historically look at your achievement as it relates to literacy, did that mandate change much of anything in your processes? And most importantly, did it improve literacy rates across all of your grade levels. Because we've been talking all year about the intent of this dyslexia legislation. And quite honestly, the root of the intent very much aligns to the intent of that third grade reading guarantee. Now we've learned and have grown and know that holding kids back, and we have research to say that there are certain things from that mandate that weren't effective. In the third grade reading guarantee manual, one of the visuals that they have in there is screening is the heart of prevention. One of the huge components of this dyslexia law is what? Screening, right? So in order to put things in place, we really got to take a historical lens at what we're doing. And one of the different parts about this House Bill 436 is that human capacity piece, right? That, you know, that FTE, that number, that person, that expert, and then that professional development requirement. So we're going to kind of walk through an activity to kind of have us go through that reflection and think about what we've done well and maybe where we have opportunities to kind of move the needle forward or change a current practice based off of these mandates. Because what we know at the end of the day, where our students have reading disabilities or where they have weaknesses, if they're at risk for anything, has historically always been the same, right? So our students who we were trying to identify and, you know, prevent from reading loss with a third grade reading guarantee, they probably had phonological deficits, or their deficits came up with their fluency and speed deficits. So we also know that both of these deficits are main indicators for being at risk for dyslexia. So where we've had learners struggling has not changed. We have known from the beginning that reading difficulties lay in these same foundational skills. What these rules are asking is not what our learners need more of or more testing for. What we're really asking is, how can we change, right? Because a student overall, no matter whether or not they're sitting in class very stoic every year, or if they're bouncing off the walls, or if they're not really, you know, they're being pulled out all the time, research tells us that every single learner makes growth of a year, with or without us as educators, right? They make a year's worth of growth every year. Yet, oftentimes when we start talking about these things and adding things to our plates, we hear teachers say, well, our kids are always going to be low. This isn't going to change anything. A different test isn't going to change anything. We've done all these different tests, et cetera, et cetera. But what our kids have proven is that they are resilient. Despite us, they can still make a year's growth, right? So where are we going to be as it relates to rolling out these new things to support the needs of our learners? Are we going to be on the side of, you know, contributing difficulties to our learners? Or are we going to be on the side of, okay, let's reflect on all of our practices, not add to our plates, but, you know, pull back and think about what we've done, what we haven't done, how that has impacted student learners, and then make decisions as it relates to implementing certain mandates. Because despite of us, our kids are gaining a year's worth of growth every year. And we are all working our tushies off every year too, right? And kind of hitting our heads against the wall because we're seeing a lot of the same results. So what do we need to change? Because we know, unfortunately, that if we don't really pull back all the layers of the onion, that history will continue to repeat itself, right? So before we can make decisions on what our process will be for utilizing a multi-certified individual, we need to look at what we're currently doing, what we have done, and then make adjustments, because the needs of our learners have been historically the same from the beginning, according to research.
I think this is going to be an important consideration. You know, when I think about the third grade reading guarantee, And thinking about it from the lens when I was a curriculum director, and even as a teacher and as a literacy coach, is that with the third grade guarantee, we met the letter of the law. That was fine. But we wrote our RIMs, but many of our RIMs looked identical. And I felt like we're punishing children, which was actually a breakdown of our system. You know, it was actually not proper instruction in K1 and 2. And then our third grade teachers were feeling all the pressure that they had to make up all that ground and get these kids to pass. And if they couldn't, who paid for that? The kids paid for that because then they're retained. And then the interesting thing about the retention is, did their instruction change? And I can only speak for our district, it did not. And so they just repeated third grade with those strategies that didn't work the first time and were actually probably lacking from kindergarten first and second. But because of our lack of knowledge in the science of reading and the skills that they need on the word side and the language side, and really being able to break it down, our RIMs weren't effective either, because we were just putting reading comprehension down when there's 8 different things that can contribute to why they're not comprehending. So, you know, just speaking about that, what I'm excited about with the dyslexia law is that they're actually putting some teacher training to it. They're actually going to help us with assessments that are going to get down to the nitty gritty of this. So, I mean, I don't know what your experiences with the third grade reading guarantee is, but it wasn't very positive for us. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in on that.
I would agree that the third grade guarantee laws, rules, compliance requirements didn't maybe move the needle on our instructional practices. And everything you just said, Debbie, I agree with totally. I guess the thing that I see is different here, and I do believe like the professional development, the 18 hours of professional development, and it is fine and is necessary if we really want people to change the way they teach. To me, it's the certification piece that requirement of a certification is a heavy lift for teachers. I mean, and for a district to pay for if we're going to support it, it's not the same as, you know, in the third grade guarantee, they had to have all teachers had to have a certain certification, or we ended up, a lot of people took the test and passed. That was the easy way. We paid for their test. Or at that time, we had a university partnership that offered a course that got them that. It was a far easier lift from a district perspective trying to meet that requirement than it is going to be to do this certification process. That's just my 2 cents. Especially since it's an unfunded mandate. I'd love to have 50 teachers in my district certified to the level that they're expecting, but to ask that many, ask teachers to do this on their own time. And, even if we're paying for it, it's still a lot of their own time, effort, and energy going into it. So.
Absolutely agree. And I'm hoping that we've got a lesson learned here too, is that for example, the reading endorsement and things that you had to have to be that highly skilled teacher in third grade. At least I can speak for my reading endorsement. It didn't address the science of reading and the breakdown of those skills. So it in and of itself was not very helpful, because it didn't give me what I needed to know to actually target where the gaps were with my kids. So I'm hoping that that's a lesson learned into why it's more scripted as to what kind of professional development our teachers will be getting.
Can I ask a question? And maybe I'm jumping ahead too much, but the majority of teachers are going to get the 18 hours of professional development. But my question is, we are a preschool through 5th grade elementary school. And my question, I guess, would be, and I know you're supposed to have at least one teacher that has that certification. My question would be, what if that person leaves and then you have none? So what is a good number that would make sure that your school is set? Because the requirement, even the Wilson training is very involved. It's a practicum that is very, very involved. It's almost like getting a second master's degree. It really is. It's like getting a second master's degree. And if you're using Wilson, I'm just using that as an example, you can't use K3 students. You have to use a 4th or 5th grade student for your practicum piece. So those are some of my questions. I don't know if anyone has information on that, but I'm struggling with how many teachers do I ask to go through this process? And what if you don't have any teachers that want to go through this process?
I think we're using our person from the ESC, and I hope that they're getting a team of people so that we don't have that if she leaves, if she retires, what happens. I think that she's going to be our go-to person. She's kind of given us some calmness in all of this, and they're trying to figure out then, can they provide the 18 hours of professional development? But you're right, a school our size, we're not going to have multiple people that have that are certified in that.
Any other thoughts?
Also, because, as to what Karen was saying, the certification process is lengthy. It's not something that a teacher can get very quickly. And so I guess be cautious as you're thinking that through. If you're going to use them for your 18 hours, they probably won't have the certification in a timely enough manner to meet the requirement of the law, because at the end of this next school year, you've got to have your K1 teachers have to have that 18 hours. Now, the state will be putting out free modules. They're expected out late summer, probably August-ish. But those will be free modules that will be available, and they're all on those different topics that were listed out in one of the previous guidebooks. So those are being created right now.
So, and to that point, that kind of all of those questions, Karen, I think that those are really great questions, and that's why we kind of wanted to call attention to what is required, right? Like really like determining staffing and not really knowing all the identified needs of your learners as it relates to what these screeners might pop up, and knowing, like, as you build your teachers' knowledge, some different teachers might be interested in a certification process, others may not. There's a lot going on. And so we have been talking about the role of this person kind of being embedded in our school improvement efforts. But right now, all that needs to happen is adopt a process for teachers related to certification. That's all you guys have to do. And that document is basically written for us. Okay, so the Ohio's Dyslexia Committee's definition of appropriate certification, which is linked in the Padlet, basically spells out what the Dyslexia Committee has considered to be approved certification pathways. In this document, it's 12 pages. It's kind of hard to like pull apart or look at visually, should I say. But really, it says the Ohio Committee recognizes 6 pathways for a certification program or to be considered certified. Now, within each of these pathways, there are sometimes an alternate route certification. Okay, so let's look specifically at 3. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to click that. So here, a certified structured literacy dyslexia specialist certification or structured literacy dyslexia specialist alternate route certification. So if you scroll to the different parts of this document, they'll have what it would look like through the identified program or current certification process, and then we'll provide an alternate route for that certification. So I'm going to scroll down 3. Okay. So it'll explain the common role of that specialist would play, which you guys could determine. So that would be something that might look different in yours. But then they talk about what are the requirements for the or based off of like what kind of degree you have to have in order to embark on the program. But then it talks about if you were to go an alternate route outside of the, box labeled study requirements, what that would require. So specifically, if you look at this one, like the practicum requirement. So if you go through the certification process through the IDA accredited partner with all of these hours, these specifics have to be a part of that practicum. An alternative would be, okay, we'll have our teachers produce a letter of support from a parent that describes X, Y, or Z and explains essentially like that this intervention or support from this identified individual is valid. And then they would complete their case study. And so instead of doing it like embedded in the program, there's an alternate route where you guys could gather and help collect that through a process determined by your local districts. Do you have to offer all these routes? That's for you all to decide. Now, all you have to do right now is just adopt the certification program. It doesn't say you have to have all of these people in different spaces. Well, I'm not trying to say do less than, but there's a lot of things, and putting a structured literacy program in place. I mean, we know a change cycle can take 5 years just to have all the foundational pieces in place, right? So you can't do this all at once. So what the law says as it relates to those established disciplinary teams and the members on those teams is, and this is where like in the handbook, the certified personnel would, they recommend could sit, but it says establish a multidisciplinary team to administer screening and intervention measures and analyze the results of the measures. A lot of us have our OIP process in place where you discuss this. The team shall include trained and certified personnel. Certified personnel meaning certified personnel how we've always seen it, right? It's not certified with the multi-sensory literacy XYZ specialist certification. It's certified personnel as it relates to like, I'm an, intervention specialist, we have a general education specialist, we have a speech path, et cetera, et cetera. And then a stakeholder with expertise in the identification, intervention, and remediation of dyslexia. So kind of like that additional voice, maybe that historically has not been at that table, or maybe they already exist at that table. But that stakeholder, they define that more specifically in the guidebook of what that stakeholder can look like and who that can be. So on page 18, if you go to the guidebook, and I'm going to pull it up and over. Okay. Page 18, this is the top, and this is first paragraph here. I'm going to give you a moment to find it and read it. Okay. So the stakeholder, this additional person, can be anyone with an interest in reading outcomes and can be from the district, can be a parent, can be a community member, but the stakeholder needs to be knowledgeable and experienced in guiding just conversations around analyzing literacy data and planning instruction. The stakeholder may be an educator with a multisensory structured literacy certification. They may be a school psychologist. They may be a speech language pathologist with expertise. They may be an individual from the community with specific knowledge as it relates to dyslexia assessment. May, right? These are examples. So when we're thinking about our processes and we're making considerations about local certification processes, taking the time now to identify our strengths and opportunities as it relates to past practices, which are some of the consideration activities we're going to walk you through today, can help you to determine the roles and responsibilities of these certified individuals to fill in maybe gaps or strengthen things that you already have in place. And then from there, you can start identifying who already meets, these certifications, and then recruit accordingly. So like on your onboarding, like in your job, like searches or lists, you could say, required bachelor and would be great if they had X certification, right? Because we know higher ed has a place in this and they're going to add on to this. So the earnest of this does not all fall on you, and it's going to take more time for it to happen. So you can build this into your recruiting efforts. Then you might want to identify, if you're starting to think about getting people certified locally, identifying who would already be a good candidate for that. Maybe that's coming after, a year of giving everyone the same professional development and structured literacy. And then from there, how do you want, or do you want this certified individual to play a part in your professional development considerations moving forward? So we know that if we do have a a certified, I'm just going to say certified individual because it's like 7,000 words long. So if we do have certified individuals on staff, they will have the capacity to be approved to provide future training and opportunities for additional certifications within your district.
So Jackie, it's Angie. Can I say something?
Yep.
So you keep saying an individual, but I think that it really we have to build capacity. Like going back to what Karen said, we cannot rely on one person to do everything.
Absolutely.
So Karen, you made me think. I kind of started last year with my staff because I knew this was coming and I wanted to make sure we were good. So we had just 4 teachers out of my whole district, and I know I'm bigger than you, but they did Wilson. And then my reading teachers are doing letters this year. And then our ISs will do letters next year. And we will have some additional intervention teachers doing just words. But I think, like Jackie said, made such a good point that this stuff is going to take up to 5 years to get everything in place. So I just think as districts, and some of your districts are smaller than mine, so I totally get that limitation. But really thinking about long-term, where do you want to be in 5 years, and then plan with that end in mind, because it is overwhelming, the amount of things that this dyslexia law is going to bring to us. But I think in the end, it is going to make us all so much better. So I really appreciate what Karen and Carol both shared.
Well, in the long-term thought process, I'm thinking of, we are in the workforce. We're currently in here trying to figure it out, but I'm thinking, okay, let's go to the collegiate area. Are our young collegiate students, college students, are their degrees now changing rapidly? Are they going to get a degree, or are
They actually are.
going
They
to
are. the state of Ohio is now requiring a phonics class even for the 4.9 certification. And I know Bowling Green, because I work really closely with some of the professors over there in the literacy department, they have revamped their early childhood and inclusive early childhood program. And it includes, like, it's right here in front of me, it includes like structured literacy courses now. Phonological awareness assessments are part of their practicum. Phonics lessons, they're required to teach them. So they are making changes, at least at the Bowling Green. But I
So are
believe
they
the state of
gonna come
Ohio
up-
also requires a phonics course from kids. And I actually taught one for grades, the teachers that were going 4 through 9. So, and that
Are
was
they
a
going
few
to come
years
out
ago.
of college then with the complete package and all certification, and that we're trying to figure out how to get?
That alternate thing that Jackie showed us, it
Yeah.
actually has a section in there about students that are graduating from college and how they can qualify as certified. I don't know, Jackie, I was looking at that when you were talking about it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I think you're right, Angie, like you're gonna have some gains from some districts from some universities that are going to maybe provide an extra endorsement and it would meet the dyslexia certification. Some universities may not. It's all going to depend. But as those come up, those will be ongoing important things to consider, because like to Angie's point, she's working directly with Bowling Green. She's in Bowling Green. Where is she going to go when she wants to hire and consider new staffing? She's going to make sure that Bowling Green, like she's at their career day and things of that, because she's right. It has to be an embedded ongoing process. And that's what the dyslexia guidebook says. And I love that you brought clarity to the words, Angie, because you're right. We want to identify and recruit certified educators, and we want to see who we currently can identify. This is on page 48. And then knowing like later on that we're going to embed these individuals into our trainings, right? We want to create structures that will have internal support so that we can retain a larger group of certified, experts. So what we did today, and well, first of all, what the guidebook does is it breaks down these stages, right? But what we think is crucial is there's stages that happen before we should even look at who we currently have on our staff, because we need to figure out what we want our certification process to be, and we want to figure out what we want that role to be before we can identify who might have those criteria already in place based off of their current expertise. So we were stepping through our activities today to considerations before identifying and recruiting, because you first need to know what you want it to look like and how it will function within your current LEAs. So, but calling attention to, there is no ratio provided. I don't want to say like, where's the requirement for these certified individuals? Like, what does it say in the law? Because really it's creating this process, right? And then organically it's going to hopefully grow to become something of this caliber, but there is no way y'all can do this in 1 year and have this all ready to go by 2023. So all you need to do right now is adopt a process. You need to adopt a process. And then the great thing about processes and policies is as you start to go through this like list, right? So like this symbol here was to say like, we're going to be bouncing back and forth all over the place, up and down, all over this list of considerations. And it's going to get muddy. And when we start to bring other experts in or other groups of departments, people are probably, we're going to take 5 steps forward to take 3 steps back. And so does that mean that this process that we adopted is completely set in stone? No, we have boards in place. We can make changes to things. And as we have these conversations, but the overall intent of really digging and thinking about all of these considerations is so that eventually we have this ongoing structured literacy program that's a component of our entire instructional frameworks, whether that's through an MTSS framework or whether that's guided through your quote unquote OIP teams, whatever we want to call it. all of this intentional work and discussion and pulling back all of those layers of the onion now are vital, because otherwise then this will just sit as the policy on some shelf somewhere, and that, you know, nobody will ever have access to. So it's requiring us to adopt a process, but then we need to, using the guidebook and the things that we've learned, talk about how to implement that process into our best practices, right? Because we all have local control and we're all allowed to make our own decisions. So mandates can only take us so far, but we can use these mandates right now to prioritize the need for structured literacy.
Do you know so the process that has to be established, that says 22-23 school year, does that by the start or the deadline? So like, when do I have to have that as a written process?
My understanding is by the end of the 22-23 school year.
And does that have to be board policy? Or is it just a document that we follow that we know that isn't necessarily board policy?
So I would say, what are your local steps for adopting a process?
Okay.
So another thing that I wanted to call attention to is, does anybody here use Neola for your policies and processes? Some people do. Okay, Neola is just a company that some people use to like get their, you know, their blanket overall policies for IDEA and ESSA and ADA, different things within the law. So if you use Neola, I called them and they said they just had one of their legal alerts, like their updates that came out in February. They're going to be addressing the House Bill 436 legislation requirements in their next legal alert, which is in August. They then said they will offer a template for districts to support like the requirements for a process, right? Because Neola, oftentimes people just use them to partner on creating policy, and process is something that Neola can support, and that template will be available to any of their, you know, constituents. But if it's mandatory, or if their lawyers see that as it has to be a policy, for example, then they will make it like an actual, like, not template. Like it'll either be a template or something that you can just, you know, adopt into your boards. So that's really, it's going to be a lot about local decisions, because I can't get in the weeds or know enough about policy versus process as it relates to how your boards and leadership teams define those. Any thoughts on that? Interpretations on adopting a process? Does it need to be board approved? What are you guys thinking?
I think that if Neola's gonna push it out in August, we just wait and see what they have. I mean, I got enough to do.
Right. Okay, so does that provide any clarity, or is there just more thinking now? What's going on in our minds right now?
Well, I think for TPS for sure that, you know, we have a system in place where, you know, we have to have committee and then the committee has to go through board. So I think though that they have decided that they're kind of just waiting for a little bit more information, because right now we have summer school coming. So they have their hands full with that. But we have definitely a process in place of how these things get rolled out and what they do. So I think when we're sure that they have, we have all the facts, this just came out and, the girl from Swanton said they're going to be working this week and getting a committee together. We will probably wait a little bit longer as we get summer school off and going to meet together, in August and make some decisions with that.
Well, I'm thinking state is obviously always going to trump local, but I'm thinking back of like for the third grade guarantee or all the new high school graduation pathways. Have we put that into our local policy? I don't think so. I mean, every time they make a change, I don't think I could, unless it's in our our handbook for like graduation, but I'm sure there's wording in there that we follow the guidelines of the state law, and that's more of a blanket coverage that's going to cover everything. So I don't think that, but that's just my gut thought. I hadn't really given any of that part thought, but I think that we probably won't have to spell out every step and every year requirement. I don't think we would have to do any of that, just that we're going to follow. I'm sure that because we're obviously, have to follow state law, that it's a blanket thing. It's going to cover everything.
I think that's a very good point, Carol. And knowing how that would also be, something while you're in these planning things, like what are your processes in place? I feel like we worked with a lot of districts who'll get the ball rolling on something, especially some of our bigger districts or some of our community schools who have a sponsor where there's already a decision like kind of in place or a process. They'll get excited. They'll put all of these, procedures in place, or like, we're going to do X, Y, or Z. And it's all laid out in our, local literacy plan. And then it goes up to the step to the next, the sponsor or the central office. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, junk, like we can't do that because there's already identified thing for all, schools under this sponsor or schools under this district. So I think that's, very important to consider, like when we're talking about engaging a variety of stakeholders to make these decisions, who are the ones that are going to move it through your entire process, and who do you need to sit with? You need to, one school's lawyer might be really adamant about creating very explicit things in your student handbook or something, or your parent handbook as it relates to screenings and all of that. All of those things are going to be local control, and some of us may be like, we don't really need to know all of that. Like we get those communications maybe in other avenues through different updates. Great. But if some of us are sitting there and wondering like, how do we do that? And maybe that would help provide you with some clarity as to what a process versus a policy means as it relates to your LEA, then that could be something to kind of dig into now too. Any other thoughts? So Debbie and we created some documents to help just kind of guide discussions. I kind of am thinking, Debbie, that we kind of explain the intent of both of these tools first, and then we see kind of where everyone is. Like, is this something we want to do as a group, or is this something that more like they could use to bring back to their teams? Does that sound okay? Okay, so I'll explain the first one, you explain the second one.
With the considerations
Yeah.
that we're talking about. Okay, so Jackie had shared a document, strengths and opportunities, with you. I didn't know if you had an opportunity to print that off or not, but what is created on that document is some guiding questions to kind of support you as you're putting your action steps together. Because we know with this certification process, we really need to look at our overall system to see where that person is where do we want to focus their efforts? You know, where are we sitting as a district? And then where are we going to need that support from that certified person? So as we're thinking about their role, we would want to look at the screening and the process monitoring considerations. So what are the strengths of our current screening process? And then what are the opportunities for growth? Like, so do we have the right screeners in place? As we look at the dyslexia legislation, it talks about all those things that should be in a tier 1 screener for dyslexia. And when we're talking about this, I also want to say that this is good for all kids. It's not just that population of kids that are going to be flagged as having possibility of dyslexia. They're on some type of a spectrum, but these types of screenings should move the needle for every one of our kids in our district. It's going to benefit everyone. So if we think about this through a lens of our entire district and how we're approaching language and literacy education to all of our kids. So looking at the screening processes and using pages 22 and 20 through 33 in the guidebook, then what is our instructional framework? Okay, so what are the strengths of our framework and what are the opportunities for growth? So I know that some people are already in a structured literacy framework and others are transitioning to it and others haven't even started that. So where are your strengths and where are your opportunities for growth? And then the support from the handbook comes from 10 through 21 and 32 through 47. And within that, like, how does it fit into our our MTSS, our RTI? Do we have decision rules in place? You know, all of those components are kind of built into that along with screening. Then looking at our multidisciplinary team, all right, do we have a team in place? I mean, you may already have your TBTs and BLTs and DLTs in place. Do we need to what are the strengths of those teams? And what are the opportunities for growth? You know, maybe we need different stakeholders. Maybe we need to get our speech pathologist on those teams. Maybe we need to make sure that that's whoever that certified person is going to be. Maybe we want them on the team. You know, how are all kids with special education at the team? You know, making sure that we have every child represented on those multidisciplinary teams. Then what is our process for communication with our parents, guardians, excuse me, and those that have custody of our children? All right, so do we have a plan in place, a formal plan for how we're communicating with our parents and what's our follow-up procedure? What do our letters look like? So what are our strengths and what are our opportunities for growth? I know that we have some districts who have really been looking at that the last couple of years, is that some of the things they were sending home were all in teacher language. And so it was very difficult for a parent to understand that doesn't have that background knowledge. So do they know how to read those reports that are being sent home? So just thinking about that as well. And then there's the charts all the way across where you can kind of put everything together based on your current strengths and your current opportunities for growth. What are the roles and responsibilities that we might want to assign to that certified person? Then we have those district considerations for the last thing is once we have all that in place, then we can begin starting to think about the who. Who do we want to fill those roles? Because that who is going to be really important. Because depending on what you're going to ask them to do, obviously part of their day with their expertise and knowledge, they should hopefully be working with some children for at least part of their day. All right, but then are they going to be in charge of professional development for your other educators? Do they have that skill set? Are they going to need some special training in how to provide professional development to adults? That's a whole different ballgame, teaching adults versus teaching children. Are they well respected? Will teachers listen to them? You know, are they good with data? Are they good with, planning interventions that match what the data is saying? So really being intentional. It's not just who wants to do it, but do we have the right person in that place? It's going to be really important to move your district forward. And so we've got a whole list of things to consider. Identifying your certification candidates, and then supporting an external training. So all kinds of considerations. So is this something, would you want to go through the other part before we talk about what direction they want to go?
Sure. I'll go over the other tool, and then,
Okay.
so these questions were just taken directly from that visual, that stages thing that we showed you earlier. The other component, and based off of like your current needs, and where you think you should kind of focus your time planning, is this document taking a lens to the comparing the third grade reading guarantee requirements with the House Bill dyslexia law requirements. We all have that. Okay. So the intent of this document is there are some components we know that we want to align from our practices for the third grade reading guarantee with some of the expectations for the House Bill 436. We know that House Bill 436 has additional considerations like the certification and the professional development. But then we also know that the third grade reading guarantee has additional requirements, for example, reading improvement plans. So all of those things will still need to take place. So you are going to get questions, like we've kind of like aligned our practices and our minds to the mandates of this third grade reading guarantee. And this is the chance to, one, peel back, what are we doing well with meeting that mandate? And then maybe what could we add on, or what can we remove, or, you know, based off of these new mandated requirements for the dyslexia law, and how will that impact our school improvement efforts moving forward? So what this does, so like, for example, I just want to call something to your attention. Like if you have the dyslexia guidebook up, turn to page 16 and 17 and just give it a once over. It is all about multi-tiered systems of support using evidence-based practices, right? We all seeing that? All right, now this third grade reading guarantee manual. If you have it printed off, great. If you don't, I'm going to put it on the screen, but I'm going to scroll to page 9. And let's eyeball that. Are we seeing a lot of alignment? Right. So back to that original point, we have systems and processes in place, and if we don't, before we can implement this new dyslexia legislation, with the intention of it improving student outcomes, what did we do well according to this previous guidance, and what did we maybe miss the boat on? Where do we have opportunities? And then what do we need to de-implement, take off of our plates, to make sure that we're really aligning with the intent of both of these mandates? Because if we think about it through the lens of all learners, and we know that all learners who have reading difficulties are going to probably produce their difficulties are going to come out in the same areas of the simple view of reading, then both of these mandates are kind of intending to do the same thing, right? So what are you going to leverage? What do you want to promote as as educators and as leaders, because you're gonna have people say, and rightfully so, well, how is this any different than third grade reading guarantee? We need to know what we've done in the past and maybe where we might have, missed the mark, what we've done well, and think about how we're communicating these things out to all of our stakeholders, including our general education teachers, our intervention specialists, all of our specialists, our outside supports. Because I even think looking at that through the lens of your assessments, your family communication, what are the requirements for third grade reading guarantee? What are the requirements for the law? And then are we going to align those efforts? Are we not going to align those efforts? So all of these considerations per the identified areas that are in both guidebooks. Third grade reading guarantee mentions information on interventions. House Bill 436 mentions specifics on interventions. Some topics like professional development, the third grade reading guarantee guidebook makes mention to best practices, but we might not see a mandate in that law. So this can be a good activity to kind of just get us all kind of moving forward with the same maybe intent, right? And maybe get some of those misconceptions off the table. It can be a lot of work to do this. Maybe you don't do this with everyone, but it can help kind of align your efforts and have a common message across your districts or your schools. So these were two activities that we wanted to provide to you. We also see, I just wanted to reference, there's the third grade reading guarantee manual, and then also in the Padlet and the follow-up email I sent, there was this like third grade reading guarantee RIMP page and diagnostics. That's like the 3-pager of the requirements for third grade reading guarantee, kind of like we have the 2-pager for the dyslexia law. So I would have all 4 of those in place if you were to go through this with your teams. But we do have 15 minutes kind of remaining. What are we thinking? Debbie shared the strengths and opportunities for the sections of the dyslexia guidebook, and then we stepped back a little further and looked at this law in comparison to third grade reading guarantee. What are your thoughts?
Jackie, I love these documents that you guys created. Fantastic. So I have a dyslexia committee though in the district, but it is K-12. Have you guys thought about a hook to get the secondary involved? Because they don't care about third grade reading guarantee. It never has applied to them. So, I mean, what are you thinking? How do I hook them in?
Any thoughts, everyone?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Now, I wonder if I just say, just because maybe it's the conversation to hook them in is just, we want to make sure whatever we decide to do for moving forward with the dyslexia law and implementation, that it aligns with the third grade reading guarantee. So we're not doubling our efforts. Maybe that's the best way.
Well, I kind of think that why on earth did they not just put the third grade guarantee inside of the dyslexia guidebook? But in the big scope of things, if we take care of our younger readers, then we're not going to have an issue in third grade. That the third grade thing should not be a thing anymore if we're catching and getting everyone where they need to be at the lowest grade level.
Very good point. And I think, Angie, when we think of some secondary teachers and some of the things that, we're asking them to do as it relates to complex text and rigor and making sure that they're embedding that through reading and writing and, discussion every single day. And a lot of our teachers are saying like, well, they don't have basic literacy skills. So it's really hard to kind of like do those things. So I feel like if they put their efforts, into those early skills, then not that we know that secondary teachers are literacy teachers, everyone is, but if they put their efforts towards supporting this, then it's going to provide them more ease to really utilize those adolescent literacy strategies across their disciplines when those third graders become fifth graders, et cetera, et cetera. And those tiers of vocabulary words, I think about that too. If we know that we have a continuum where we have some of those academic words being, you know, supported and infused and explicitly taught, you know, and pulled apart according to the 4-part processor in those early grades, then those kids are going to have those tier 2 academic words. And then so when they get to 8th grade and they start considering career paths, and there's very discipline specific industry words, tier 3 words, we can put our efforts towards that because, you know, we've created a continuum that has worked on the development of that vocabulary over the years. Kind of aligns, kind of doesn't, depends which way you look at it. Any other thoughts? Questions? Well, we want to be cognizant of time, so we'll just push through these last couple of slides, and then that should provide us an opportunity for any final thoughts towards the end. So Debbie?
This just goes back to what I was talking about previously, is that the impact of who is chosen to be your certified person. We want them to make sure that they are the right individuals in order to move these efforts forward. We don't want them to become a barrier to the work that you're trying to accomplish. So once you have that process in place, that being really intentional about who you select as the people, because good point by Karen and Angie is that we are going to have multiple people because we know how transient education is. So how do our systems going to work so that we plan for that, knowing that that's going to happen, you know, being intentional about who we select for that. Would we want to train somebody who's, and this is like, that's 5 years away from retirement? I don't know. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. You know, just being really thoughtful about who we're training and do they have the right mindset, the culture that you're trying to build within your district to really support this positively, so that it's a win for everybody. Because hopefully we're going to see changes. So even your people who are kind of the naysayers and the not believers, that they need to see it working. So we're going to need this person to work, people, I guess I should say, to really work with you intentionally with this purpose, to really accelerate this process forward so that we see growth in kids, and then we can bring other people on. They'll be believers once they see that it works. So that climate and culture that we're creating, this is a great opportunity to begin putting all of that in place.
So why are we kind of pulling apart all of this so much and just like giving way too many considerations to consider when just like implementing a mandate? Because it all really does come down to making sure that we have effective implementation, right? And making sure we have fidelity of that implementation. This one's specific, this visual specific to interventions, but we can look at these considerations across all levels of the decisions that we're making. And being able to monitor our adherence to the choices that we make, to, you know, the assessment screener rules, our exposure and duration to, you know, good, effective strategies, our teachers' quality of delivery, having solid programs in place that are aligned to meet our student needs, and making sure that we have student engagement. This is what school improvement is all about. This is what progress monitoring is about. You know, we can progress monitor test scores all the time, but like when we have a mandate and we have to monitor these, then that becomes something that we just, we have embedded into our system so that when we're having discussions in our TBTs, in our BLTs, in our DLTs, we can say, okay, we have these identified students at risk. Now, what do we need to change in our practices? Are our kids getting enough exposure? Are we adhering to what the scope and sequence of things? What is happening? And we can, then take that to our other areas of instruction and focus our efforts on actually changing and adjusting our practices as adults to meet the specific needs of our kids. So this is really what school improvement really should be focused on and all about, so that we can get to these questions. So the intentionality of our practices and our systems, putting all of that work in, can be very helpful long-term. We will open up the floor here in a moment, but we wanted to let you know that we were originally going to do June's session as an office hour, but we are no longer going to hold that session with contracts changing and things of that nature, or ending, whatever. We don't want anyone to feel like they need to come when they're not supposed to be at work. Okay, we all deserve our breaks, and some of us will be using them during this time. So we wanted to let you know we do have availability though between now and through August and into next year. Should you want to have a thought partner or anything, or talk over anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. We do ask that if you do want to talk through anything or have any questions, that you send your request to both Debbie and myself, as we'll both also be taking turns on getting some break time. So email both of us and one of us will definitely get back to you to be able to support your needs. We have 6 minutes left. We'll just open the floor. Any thoughts? Otherwise, it's been such a pleasure being with you guys throughout the year, and thank you for your commitment to the network.
Hey, Jackie and Debbie, you guys have been awesome. So appreciate you. And I really love hearing from what people are doing in other districts. So thank you for providing this time for us. I appreciate it. I learn a lot from all of you.
I also appreciate it. And I am also curious about, are we going to have this kind of forum next year as we navigate through these, through the school year? Do you anticipate hosting something like this again?
We do. The exact format, we don't know. We're working through that right now as to how we want that to look next year. We would like to bring in some expertise from our SST so we can talk through, special education, and we can talk through some other components a little more deeply with people who have more knowledge. So we're working on that right now, but yes, there will be something.
Great.
And as always, I'll follow up at the end of this session with the materials that we talked about today. And then I'll make sure that you have, where to subscribe so that you can get updates on the networks and PD that we'll offer next year. All right, we'll stick around for another 5 minutes, but have a lovely end of the year, and thank you again.